Excellent. Well, in that case, thank you all for taking the time, and it's great to be here today to talk a little bit about how we could collectively transform building electrical infrastructure for a more sustainable future. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Andrew Smyth, and I'm here on behalf of our Smart Infrastructure Buildings division, and specifically leading our sustainability business within the UK and Ireland. And what we do is our mission is all about how we can support our clients and partners with their transition to net zero, but net zero in a way that manages and optimizes their reduction of energy alongside CO2 in a very turmoil and variable marketplace. And we do that right from end to end, from upfront consulting, embedding detailed engineers who can work with you on creating your glide path to net zero, as well as looking at the implementation of these solutions, not just using the best of Siemens technology, but also our third-party ecosystem of vendors as well, and moving that into a service and operational mindset. We have many different commercial models and off balance sheet, as well as the likes of performance guarantees that we can use to support you and your clients. So that's a little bit about us. But let me talk firstly about how we face uncertainty in our sector. Within the built environment, we're operating in somewhat uncertain times. And is it the new normal? Is that what we're here to deal with? Is that what the outlook looks like? Well, actually, some of the information that's collected here, mainly from a Deloitte survey of CXOs, global CXOs in 2024, suggests it could be. Let's start at the top. With energy price volatility, we know, probably personally, within our domestic bills, we've seen how macro challenges and political challenges can affect energy prices. And we've seen over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, significant challenges on the global landscape with the COVID pandemic, closing and exiting that to see exaggerated global demand for product and services. And obviously the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. These macro challenges have a huge implication to energy prices and volatility therein. But we can also call on different market and also environmental examples of how energy markets really are struggling to deal with and catch up in many respects with this new normal. Let's take an example from the state of Texas. Many of you may remember in 2021, a polar vortex brought temperatures to a 30-year low where 4.5 million homes and businesses right throughout the state lost power. And that caused significant challenges. I was reading just yesterday how the state of California, because of the significant levels of embedded solar photovoltaic panels, solar PV systems, and historic low consumption within their area of the networks, are having to see a negative wholesale energy prices and sell power at a negative price to neighboring states as well. And more closer to home, within the last year and a half, 2 years, we've seen examples where markets are operating really quite inefficiently between different local actors. For example, in the UK, we've seen prices per megawatt hour of energy around £2,000. It's not uncommon to see that. It has happened. Whereas at the same sort of time, for the same level of energy demand in Norway, that's been at €100. So significant disparity between even very regional markets as well. We know inflation is a challenge. It's been sticky for quite some time. We've seen the Bank of England maintain interest rates, and we'll see more in the spring statement in terms of what the UK Chancellor is looking to do around that. But of course, that translates to a business risk perspective as well. That's one in terms of the cost of capital and how much it costs to secure fund and finance and debt, but also the capital availability that is available within the market. And from a CXO perspective, they're seeing increased levels of risk or perceived risk on a year-on-year basis, which puts investment pipeline at risk as well. And when you bring that into the CRE and the built environment, we know there has been an ongoing challenge around vacant commercial space. And that was something that was really exaggerated during COVID for obvious reasons. But we see commercial space is consistently a challenge, and there is a caution in new lease signings within the areas of users as well. Now, vacancies have increased across the globe, but they have somewhat steadied post-COVID. There's been somewhat of a recovery, but we remain well away from pre-pandemic highs. So there are challenges around that. And of course, from an investor perspective, they're looking to put their money where they can get the most return, but in a safe environment. And they're focusing on consumer demand and looking at things like data centers and cell towers. These are the safe investments of the time. There is challenges around office space, and that's ongoing, and it's amplified with the likes of hybrid working. What does that mean, and how is it, how is that affecting long-term leases and developments within the commercial real estate space? Now, of course, from an employee perspective, hybrid work in many respects is here to stay. It's a new dawn in terms of how we collectively work, live, breathe, and operate. And it's shifting how office spaces are used, but equally how office spaces are valued. And we're almost 3 years into that kind of post-pandemic era and looking at new space requirements. And now office occupiers, our organizations have much more insight into the types and the size of office space they need to be able to drive a productive and an engaging environment for their staff and their teams. And of course, underpinning all of that is sustainability. And commercial real estate, the built environment, is a significant player within the global CO2 footprint. Real estate directly and indirectly is accounting for around 30% of global energy-related emissions. Now, around 8 to 10% of those come from fossil fuels that we use directly within residences, domestic and commercial buildings. And around 20% of that is looking at heat and electricity used outside of, but used to power, so somewhat more indirect. But a significant consideration when we're looking at the global net zero journey. And underpinning all of that, there is obviously a shortage of staff. We know there's a skills gap within engineering, generally speaking, and that is something that is consistent within the sector as well. So if we take heightened levels of uncertainty as somewhat of a new operating norm, then how do we create a sustainable transition within the built environment? And it's a question where we need to consider the future state, but perhaps we start by reflecting on what is there today. Put it this way, we aren't quite yet dealing with the Back to the Future worlds and the Jetson worlds. I haven't got my hoverboard that I was promised when I was growing up as a kid. And whilst the world and technology moves really rapidly, perhaps it's true to say that our buildings won't look that much different within the next 10 to 20 years. And I think that's a fact that's quite exaggerated when we start to see that it's estimated, of course, but up to 80% of the infrastructure, the buildings that we use now today will still be in operation come 2050. And that's a core challenge, it's a core date in terms of this whole global net zero transition. And so if the majority of the stuff we have today is still going to be in operation by 2050, we need to do a lot more with it. And that brought me back to a quote I'd heard during an interview with Jeff Bezos, whereby he said he often gets asked, what's going to change in the next 10 years? How can I fit my business, my idea, my value proposition around what's coming? Whereas his view is, to do that effectively, you need to understand what isn't going to change. What are the buying behaviors? What are the consistent elements of life that are not going to change and evolve over the course of that? And you can build upon them and around them. So understanding what won't change in the next decade is as powerful as understanding what will. And I guess then from a built environment point of view, we must understand what are the systems that will still be required in the future. How will these systems operate in decades from now? And how will that focus and how will that operation shift to be a much more sustainably minded society? So for me, at least, that means we need to find a balance, and that's a balance between the old, the new, and obviously the existing as well. But despite all of that, it's absolutely fair to say that buildings have and will continue to evolve. But perhaps it's a case that evolution isn't actually revolution. And that's somewhat typified by the idea that the core elements of any commercial building over the course of the last 5, 10, 20 years will probably remain so in the next decade. Things like heating, cooling, access, security, IT, communications, hygiene, you name it. All of these core systems will still be there in the years to come. So we should perhaps think of evolution as more of an ongoing refinement and how we can start to provide a digital layer to overlay all of these discrete and individual systems to provide a true holistic overview of the building and/or campus, and how we can then integrate that with intelligence to enhance building operations, looking at things like comfort, also predicting and managing faults in a near real-time basis, all with the aim of creating more human-centric space tailored towards the users, their well-being, but of course, underlying that is productivity. How can space deliver more for its people and the users it's designed to serve? Certainly within Siemens, we believe that sustainable buildings will be increasingly autonomous, and that will rely on the power of digital and IoT as we start to move on that transition. So that leap between a traditional building and autonomous building, well, it will still have the core operational assets that we mentioned earlier. However, it will also call upon increased levels of connectivity, of data, and of control. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. We've been working in the higher education sector for quite some time. So we've been seeing some of the press we put out with the University of East London lately around a huge water source heat pump, which is a fantastic opportunity to decarbonise heat, a massive challenge. But some years ago, we started working with the University of Birmingham. And the university and the vision, the leaders had a vision at the time to look at creating the world's smartest campus. And that's a campus that delivers on both the carbon neutrality commitments, but a campus that also looks to embed advanced digital controls with on-site renewable technologies, all underpinned with a digital backbone and a digital twin of the campus. So Siemens were publicly procured to develop and deploy this concept right throughout the Edgbaston campus. And to put it in context, I think there's 250 to 300 discrete buildings within this area. And as a result, there are now tens of thousands of assets, digital assets, physical assets, all in operation throughout the smart campus. And all of this provides compelling insight into how the estate is used in real time, understanding then how we can drive additional efficiencies from all of those existing systems and where we can tweak and train and refine operations. And all of this, interestingly, was funded by Siemens. There's no capital involvement or capital outlay either. And it's a part of a decade-long service arrangement for the Smart Campus where we will own and manage and operate all of these assets for the university during that process. And again, just to give a bit of context about what makes this sustainable, well, it's considering everything. It's the energy, looking at a baseline audit of the campus, what's going on, where's the consumption, looking at the physical infrastructure, from the electrical network studies, how much capacity do we have, where's the fault loads, what can we do in terms of integration of new renewable assets as well, and how does that play into a pathway to net carbon zero? We're looking at behaviour change because, of course, any of this is a massive transformational plan. We need to do that for and with the people it's designed to serve. It shouldn't just be top down like any good organisational transition. We looked at the data, the IoT, from the middleware and the data and the integration of all of the existing legacy systems, but also coupling that with new state-of-the-art control systems as well. We rolled out hundreds of different sensors, thousands, many thousands actually, different sensors to look at things like space occupancy, integration with BMS, and many other points. And all of that coming into a consistent common apps and dashboards underpinned with the digital twin. Smart transport was mentioned at the outset, the likes of how we can integrate EVs and provide much more flexibility as a result of doing that. But even things like smart streetlights, which overlay and understand where people are using the campus as well. And even then starting to look and consider things like the operation of the estate, not just from the smart control room, but also look at the business models and everything that goes around it. So for us, it's been interesting, and certainly the results since go live have been really quite promising. And let's start with the big numbers. I mean, then the graphs look quite similar actually, but on the top you will see total campus energy consumption, and the bottom you'll see total campus CO2 emissions. And energy, it's fair to say, you can see the left is the COVID impact. But since 22 and 24, around 29% of energy and over 30% of CO2 reduction has occurred, which is great. Some of that has been down to renewables, albeit that's been a smaller part of what we've been doing, but there is consideration there. But what you can start to see since go live, there's been that steady reduction in both energy and CO2, aligned very much to the sustainability commitments. And that trend continues because our teams collaborate using rich space occupancy data, and we'll see more on this shortly, to explore where efficiencies can be put in place to optimize the estate, how different set points can be tailored within the building management system, for example, how we can change lux lighting reconfiguration, both within certain spaces, individual light fittings, but across the estate as a whole for different types of space. You don't treat a corridor the same way as you do to a computing lab, to a physics laboratory, for example. And all of this is built into this smart campus. We're looking at how space is being used on a term time basis, looking at academic calendars and looking at real world information to feedback in if that's actually happening. We're even looking at cleaning regimes based on the actual utilization of the space and the actual operational need. And all of these have brought in significant savings for the university already. I'll give you a couple of examples here about the space optimization piece, because this drives interesting behavioral but also operational analysis. Now, all of these reflect a different building. And the green bars show the first semester that we're mapping, and the purple there, the semester 2. And we can start to see different behavioral traits and trends on a monthly basis between all of these different sites. And the data points as the assets that we've rolled out are connecting hundreds of different data points per second to understand really what's going on in terms of the occupancy. But with all of this rich information, we can use this to have collaborative, insightful dialogue with key stakeholders to explore what and how is driving changes month to month, week to week, quarter to quarter in terms of both the student experience, but also how that space is being used. And then that occupancy information is fused into the building and the campus controls to start to actively manage automatically the estate and build that back in and closing the loop. And you can see on the right-hand side of the chart, the year-on-year changes in space optimization and space utilization, sorry. Now, I can't go into the data of what that means per building here, but any of you who know higher education as a sector know there are significant challenges, and what good looks like in the sector for space utilization isn't what it would look like in the commercial real estate sector. You know, you're talking 10, 20, 30% is somehow seen as positive. So what we've been seeing here, and you can see the number of different buildings, some of these really quite significant, some of them have a much smaller footprint in terms of gross internal area, but the year-on-year change as a result of the conversations we're having, all enabled by this technology to create a much smarter and more sustainable environment, is seeing an increase in double digits in some cases in terms of that the utilization of that space, which is really, really interesting. Because ultimately, if we want to create sustainable environments, we don't want to have to go and build more space if we've already got more than sufficient. It's all about how we manage, utilize, and optimize that. And I think for us, this data is empowering great conversation because it closes the loop to understand what can be done with these existing systems that are already rolled out. So it's not a case of a wholesale replacement of fit and forget. What we're looking to do is integrate data to really understand how these systems are operating, embedding that with IoT sensors to really understand how the students and the staff are using the space to come up with a much more holistic outcome about what can be done next, influencing not just operational strategy within the facilities teams and the states teams, but also the strategic strategy and the capital investment plan as well. Another example, Eastcheap Court in London, an organisation we've been working with for quite some time called Reinvest, with a European portfolio of dozens and dozens of sites. This is a real challenging site because the owner understood this is a heritage building. They couldn't touch the fascia and the facade of the building. They needed to do something different though internally because the shell itself, whilst looking nice internally, there was huge challenges. So it required a full retrofit and replacement. And the method, the approach that the client took was to look at really how we can integrate smart first, to look at advanced levels of control and connectivity right throughout the building, all integrated within a single digital platform for full transparency, control, and increasingly optimization of all of these different and discrete assets. For Reinvest, this creates a blueprint, one that we can follow and roll out right throughout their portfolio. And it's a blueprint that they expect, and I've seen some early signs that is increasing levels of attraction for new tenants, but it's also helping them retain their existing tenants as well in a very competitive and challenging sector. And that's because this digital layer provides that advanced levels of control and visibility, not just to the building owner, but also to the occupiers of floors of different space as well, and provides them much more flexibility as to how they live and breathe and engage within that space, which is absolutely crystal clear as a core component of that transition to a sustainable and smart society. And this is a blueprint, and this is now a highly energy efficient and carbon efficient site. And it's, again, that blueprint which they will be looking to roll out globally. As a result of doing that, they will have a full fleet view of the estate and the operation, comparing that between different areas and different buildings on a global level throughout their fleet, which is really interesting. So the objectives for a smart transition for the built environment, I think, are somewhat clear. We know we have to decrease cost. We know we have to increase impact. You know, operational cost is a huge challenge for any organization. We need to do more with less. We know this. But we also need to decarbonize, and we need to drive towards net zero. And this isn't just, certainly from my point of view, because it's the right thing to do, but it's actually really important when we start to look at the need to attract younger talent. And younger generations are much more inclined to align with the likes of sustainability. They understand the challenge of climate change, and they want to work with and for and within spaces that is embedded and mission driven to help address that much wider and global problem. But in doing all of this and using digital, as I've been describing, opens up challenges. So we need to do that, and we need to mitigate those risks, and we need to consider significantly the role of cybersecurity and physical security, of course, within the estate. But stakeholders do demand more. We know this. We need to increase levels of income from these assets. We need to improve the experience for the tenants, for employees, and of course, for visitors. Delivering more to attract tenants and creating that space that is, exciting, it's engaging, but it's productive. And of course, supporting with ESG and sustainability goals and targets as well. And that isn't just a case of putting out solar PV on your roof, for example, but it's also ensuring that from a CRE point of view, we've got the right level of data to report into things like GRESB and other global reporting standards to ensure that we can really get the value from our estate, and that's recognised within a global portfolio. These are key challenges. So I guess in conclusion, how do we transform that building infrastructure for a more sustainable future? Well, for me, it's all about not to overlook what we already have. We should build on that where possible. And we need to reflect on what won't change in the building within the next 10 years. And you harness all of this, but integrate it with a much richer data ecosystem to be able to drive insights from these independent and often siloed systems, to be able to get much more understanding of how the building holistically is operating. We then, on the back of that, can start to find complementary technologies to extend and optimize and enhance the estate, unlocking new user value and de-risking the risk of stranded assets, of course, as well. Creating increased levels of resilience operationally from a volatile energy market with green energy generated at the point of use is a no-brainer in many cases. And doing that and designing that into both the construction of your building, but also necessarily the retrofit as well, is a key challenge. But as part of that sustainable future, it's something we really need to do. And of course, with any transformation, we need to do that with the team, with the stakeholders, with the people it's trying to serve. It's all well and good talking about digitalization, creating human-centric outputs, but actually a smart building is only as good as the human inputs it receives. And we as individuals, we as teams need to have a voice in that process and ensure that the digital solutions that integrate all of these different systems provide the outcome we need, not the outcome the tech determines. I guess, as we started at the outset, sustainable transformation requires a balance, and that balance is between the energy-efficient design, it's between the efficient construction and using considered sustainable building materials. It's looking at things like water and energy management, underpinning that with smart, resilient, and future-proof connectivity and control, all while considering place-based capital to create a circular outcome much more aligned to stakeholders' needs with minimum waste in hand. So I think that's the end of my slides. Hopefully I'm not too short time or overrunning, but I guess we've got time for questions as well.
I just want to say firstly, Andrew, I found it really interesting when you spoke about how we need to consider the things that won't change, because I think we always forget in everyday life that we're dealing with humans and humans are, I would say, inherently resistant to change. And, when we talk about net zero, we're always talking about, if we consume less meat or if we emit less carbon, then, we'll achieve it. But we're constantly asking people to change their habits. We're asking people to change everything that they do. And that's a hard sell, especially when a lot of these people, especially older generations, won't actually feel the impact. So what's the motivation for them to change? And I think that's why we hear so much about carbon capture and storage as a solution to, if you want to keep emitting carbon, then it's fine, we'll just capture it and store it. What do you think of carbon capture and storage? Do you think that that's actually a solution, or do you think that we'll have to change? It'll just be
it's I don't think there's a silver bullet, and I don't think anyone around the table would, short of cold fusion, that may come one day, who knows. No, I think it's going to take a whole manner of different technologies in different spaces. I firmly believe we need to lead into what we have and the natural capital that we have available to us. Different spaces, different organizations, different countries have different assets that they can use, natural and otherwise. And I think it's really important that we have a comprehensive view of what works for that place and that society. I think carbon capture and storage, there's been a lot of trials, right? And there's a lot of money, I think, from the UK going into that. And it'll be really interesting to see how that transitions as well. If we can get it to a point where it really works and scales, well, that would be a fantastic tool in the locker of decarbonisation more broadly. It's going to take time, though, right? It's going to take a lot of investment.
Yeah.
And of course, the one thing I would say in any transition, it's all about the opportunity cost. If we do something as opposed to something else, we've got to be sure there's an outcome. And we know there are many different tools and technologies that are available now to support us on decarbonisation. And actually, you know, we can call upon them, you know, very readily. So it's a mix, and I don't think there's a clear answer yet on all of these tools.
Yeah, and I think like if we look through human history, people have changed. You know, we used to have horse and carts. We now all drive cars. So it's I think remembering, like you said during your presentation, sort of remembering there's a human element to this, and you know, ensuring that there's a benefit to those people it is really key to ensure that they're with us to change.
Yes.
And yeah, I wanted to ask quickly, and I think I already know the answer, because you mentioned about how renewables, while had an impact, probably not the most impactful thing. So in your opinion, what would you say is the single most impactful change in electrical infrastructure that can help us meet sustainability targets in the shortest amount of time?
Oh, wow, single thing. Well,
if you were going to put your money where your mouth is,
yeah,
where would you invest?
It's a great question, and I'm going to sit on the fence, unfortunately. But I think, you know, we know we can decarbonize and push a much more electrical driven transition. You know, I think that's clear. For me, one of the biggest challenges is decarbonisation of heat, and it's a case that we're not going to move overnight to electric heating in every space. So we need to look at technologies to help us move quite quickly, because the heat piece within the buildings is a significant contributor to carbon. So for me, the decarbonisation of heat is a tough nut, but it's one we have to crack to get credibly to net zero. But doing that in a way, you know, again, we could talk about heat pumps, water source, air source, ground source heat pumps, and everyone will have a view, much like they will on carbon capture and storage. And I'm not here to say mine's right or anyone else is wrong, but technology does work, but it has to be designed well, implemented excellently, and it has to be done based on a real clear view of what the building needs and how it operates. So you need to take that data and analytical lens on what the infrastructure is doing first before you then move into the implementation, or else you could end up designing something that isn't fit for purpose. It could be too big or too small, and then you end up with an asset that is stranded. It's a wasted investment, and ultimately discredits a broader transition to net zero. So I think the biggest challenge, it doesn't answer the question, but the biggest challenge is certainly the decarbonisation of heat, and doing that in a way that brings together all of those different pieces of existing infrastructure, and understanding what the future needs and the current needs of the building are, will be some of the key challenges we need to address.
Thanks, David, for those on the session who want to learn more about the decarbonisation of heat. There is a panel session later on today where we're going to debate that very subject. So you've sort of teased us, but you know, there's going to be even more. So as you say, there's going to be a lot of thoughts about it, and I hope that that's going to be a good session. Quickly before you go, I know we've only got 2 minutes. You've already mentioned, you know, how you, especially with the university, Siemens sort of funded it upfront. So my next question is all about those who maybe don't have Siemens there to fund the installation. But how do you balance that upfront cost of new sustainable electrical systems with the long-term efficiency savings when you're advising building owners?
Siemens are fortunate that we have our own bank, so we rely on that. But these are a bank that I think they're the 3rd biggest private open lender in the UK. So much like any other large capital funding, so public money is there and it is available to be able to create service-driven arrangements for different assets. And for us, it's all about trying to package that up in a way that actually is the most impactful and the least challenging to a client, because many organizations don't have access to significant amounts of capital at the moment. But if we can transition that to a more service model where there is an ongoing service fee, but they hold no risk for operating these different assets, that becomes much more palatable to support a broader decarbonisation. So I think moving things into more of a service model, whether it's someone like Siemens or any other, open bank who can lend that money, create the solution, and also transition to a managed service arrangement, I think becomes really, really palatable to support decarbonisation, because you can not only see reduction of your bottom line and improvements in terms of cost on carbon, but actually you're not putting any capital in. You're only paying a monthly service fee for the rollout of years of work and an ongoing service arrangement, which takes a risk away from you. So for me, moving things into a service arrangement, it's not perfect for everyone, and obviously there are ups and downsides to everything, but it's a really nice model and can support organizations in terms of releasing strain on capital where they need to act quickly. And certainly organizations such as Siemens, but I'm sure others can help with that as well.
And I guess it sort of pays for itself in the efficiency savings that you make. You've already budgeted to spend that on energy. You might as well spend it and reduce your carbon.
Yeah, that's it. And more often than not, there is a good business case. There's a good return on a multi-year basis for these things. So you can certainly look on a longer term cycle and go, actually, how can we embed all of this? And honestly, you can start to move into a much more programmatic view as well, because it's not a case of one asset. It's how you can start to deliver suites and wholesale interventions at a much larger scale across sites where they've got multiple different assets and sites within a campus, structured locally or internationally, but bring that into a programmatic decarbonisation journey and find the funding and finance off balance sheet through a third party and create that into a long-term service contract, which again, it's not for everyone, but certainly has a lot of benefit because it pays for itself. You get bottom line return and you don't put your hand in your pocket. It's someone else's responsibility. So it kind of ticks a lot of boxes. But it's an interesting opportunity.
Just before you go, I know we're slightly running over now. We've had a question from the audience which says, "While I do understand the need for transformation to reduce power consumption, as a network planner, I see applications for points of connection for higher loads/demands. How do you explain that?"
So could you just say the question again? Sorry, John.
Yeah, no worries. While I do understand the need for transformation to reduce power consumption, as a network planner, I see applications for a point of connection for higher loads and higher demand. How do you explain that?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. I can't answer the question. It's too broad. I think there's always a challenge in terms of levels of diversity that go into a planning application, whether it's for a new build estate and you're looking at how every kettle could come on at once and what that means, and upsizing a transformer just to be worst case. Perhaps there's a bit of that in there. Perhaps it's a piece of people wanting to secure capacity and access to networks before need and are willing to then pay more upfront to get access so they can then decarbonize it in the future. We know the interconnection between the local private networks and the DNOs are going to be a huge topic of conversation with any electrical transition or zero carbon transition. So it's a huge challenge, I think, in fairness to the utilities and also the operators. Is probably a kind of cultural shift that has to come between the two. But it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I can give it the justice it deserves on the other.
Thank you, Andrew. That's all for today with you, not obviously for the rest of the event, but thank you for joining us, Andrew, and thank you for that opening keynote. It's great.
No problem. No. Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all. Bye now.